Hello, I'm Chad Boyd, Rangeland Scientist at the Eastern Oregon Agricultural Research Center. Recently, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service decided not to add the greater sage-grouse to the endangered species list. News of this decision drew a collective sigh of relief among agricultural producers and many land managers across the West. However, issues relating to habitat for sagebrush obligate species are not likely to go away anytime soon. In fact, a number of these wildlife species have experienced recent declines, suggesting we broaden our perspective by thinking about not just individual species, but sagebrush habitat as a whole. With that in mind, now is a good time for managers and researchers alike to reconsider the challenges that lie ahead of us in management of sagebrush plant communities. I'd like to spend the rest of this week going over some of the current issues in management of wildlife habitat in sagebrush systems, particularly invasive weeds, fire, and grazing.
During the last century, one of the biggest issues on western rangelands has been the establishment and proliferation of introduced annual grasses, particularly cheatgrass. This introduced annual plant now has significant presence on over 18 million acres of public land in the Great Basin alone, and often establishes in lower elevation Wyoming big sagebrush communities following wildfire. It can alter whole landscapes by promoting a frequent fire cycle that decreases or eliminates native perennial grasses and shrubs, reducing quality of or eliminating habitat for many wildlife species. Herbicide treatment with follow-up seeding can be effective at controlling cheatgrass in small areas. However, these same treatments are often cost prohibitive when applied at large scales. At present, the best advice for cheatgrass management on the landscape may be prevention, particularly when you consider that the majority of rangeland has not yet been affected by this problem. Preventing the spread of cheatgrass will involve identifying those sites most susceptible to invasion, such as lower elevation sagebrush communities with some cheatgrass in the understory, and taking appropriate fire management actions to prevent these sites from burning. Yesterday we talked about the role of invasive annual grasses in influencing wildlife habitat in sagebrush plant communities. Today I'd like to take a look at the effects of fire. The influence of fire on wildlife habitat in sagebrush landscapes has been fiercely debated. However, much of this debate may stem from confusion over sagebrush types. At lower elevations, fire can promote establishment of some invasive annual plants. A good example would be post-fire proliferation of cheatgrass in Wyoming big sagebrush habitat. However, at higher elevations, fire acts to prevent encroachment of conifers such as western juniper into mountain big sagebrush habitat. When conifers increase in abundance, particularly on sites with shallow soils, native understory grasses and shrubs can be reduced or eliminated as tree density increases. The end result of this process being a reduction in or loss of habitat for sagebrush-dependent wildlife species. Thus, fire can be good or bad news for sagebrush obligate wildlife species, depending on sagebrush type and environmental conditions. Yesterday we talked about the influence of fire on habitat quality for sagebrush-dependent wildlife species. For the next couple of days, I'd like to take a look at how habitat quality has been influenced by livestock grazing. Discussions on this topic are best divided into A, historical, and B, present-day grazing management. Historically, rangelands were often grazed season-long with stocking densities that greatly exceeded carrying capacity. By the early 20th century, there were over 30 million cattle and sheep on western rangelands. This management style helped set the stage for future wildlife habitat problems in sagebrush communities. At lower elevations, perennial grasses and shrubs decreased in abundance, clearing the way for establishment of cheatgrass and other invasive annual plants. In higher elevations, grazing reduced fine fuels to the point that fire frequency was decreased, resulting in juniper encroachment into sagebrush habitat. Yesterday we talked about the influence of historical livestock grazing practices on habitat for sagebrush-dependent wildlife species. Today I'd like to carry that discussion forward to present day. Livestock numbers on public lands have declined dramatically since the early 1900s, and grazing management practices such as deferment, seasonal use, and rotational grazing have become commonplace. The impacts of current livestock grazing management on wildlife habitat will vary depending on desired habitat and grazing management. Take sage-grouse, for instance. Moderate levels of livestock use can increase quality of brood-rearing habitat, whereas excessive grazing of grasses and nesting habitat could reduce nesting cover and perhaps nesting success. However, the reality is that only limited research-based information is available to correlate current grazing management with habitat and population changes for most sagebrush obligate wildlife species. Both range and wildlife research professionals should actively pursue these questions, because without science-based knowledge, we lack a mechanism for understanding grazing impacts on wildlife habitat, and conjecture and speculation can become elevated to the status of best available information. I'm Chad Boyd, and thanks for listening.